November 30th, 1939. 8 a.m., Helsinki. A deep, primal rumble builds from the east. Not thunder, but something far more deliberate, far more terrible. Soviet bombers, massive Tupolev TB-3s with their corrugated metal skin catching the pale winter light, sweep across the Gulf of Finland in tight formations. Their engines create a symphony of mechanical thunder that drowns out the peaceful sounds of a city going about its Thursday morning. On the streets below, office workers in wool coats pause mid-stride. A mother pulling her daughter towards school freezes, her hand tightening around the child's small fingers. They all look up. The bombs fall like deadly rain. The first explosion rips through a residential block on Tetankatu Street. The blast wave shatters windows 3 blocks away, sending glass fragments spinning through the air like crystalline knives. A second explosion. A third. The carefully ordered world of Helsinki, a civilized city of Art Nouveau architecture, tram lines and coffee houses, transforms in minutes into a vision of apocalyptic chaos. Black smoke columns rise against the gray December sky. Sirens wail, people run in every direction, some toward shelters, some simply away, driven by pure instinct. In one of those bombs lies a terrible irony. The Soviet Union has just begun a war against a nation it claims doesn't even have the right to defend itself. A war that Joseph Stalin believes will be over in 2 weeks, 3 at most. A war that the Soviet Foreign Minister, Vyacheslav Molotov, has justified by claiming Finland fired first. A lie so transparent that Finnish shells would later be nicknamed Molotov cocktails in bitter mockery. But this is no quick victory. This is the beginning of the Winter War, 105 days that will shock the world, redefine the meaning of courage against impossible odds, and prove that sometimes a small nation armed with nothing but conviction can stand against a giant. This is the story of how 3.7 million Finns faced 170 million Soviets. And survived. The Marshal. In his office at Finnish military headquarters, a 72-year-old man receives the news of the bombing with grim resignation. Baron Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, tall, aristocratic, his white mustache perfectly groomed even in crisis, has been expecting this moment for months. Some would say he's been preparing for it his entire life. Born into Swedish-Finnish nobility in 1867, Mannerheim's life reads like an adventure novel. He served for 30 years as a cavalry officer in the Russian Imperial Army, the very force he now prepares to fight. He rode thousands of miles across Asia on horseback in the early 1900s, mapping China's western territories for the Tsar. He fought in the Russo-Japanese War and World War I, rising to the rank of lieutenant general. When Finland declared independence from Russia in 1917, Mannerheim led the White forces in the brutal Finnish Civil War, emerging victorious but forever marked by the conflict's savagery. Now, recalled from retirement to serve as Commander-in-Chief of Finland's defense forces, Mannerheim understands exactly what his nation faces. His penetrating blue eyes have seen the vastness of Russia, its endless reserves of men and material. He knows, better than perhaps anyone in Finland, how badly outmatched they are. The numbers are staggering, almost comical in their disparity. The Soviet Union will commit 760,000 troops to this invasion. Finland can mobilize $300,000, and even that requires calling up nearly every able-bodied man. The Soviets have 6,541 artillery pieces. Finland has 534. The enemy possesses 3,180 tanks. Finland has precisely 32 obsolete tanks and a handful of armored cars. The Soviet Air Force will deploy over 3,800 aircraft. Finland's Air Force consists of 114 planes, many of them outdated models that would be museum pieces in other countries. But Mannerheim has advantages the Soviets don't understand. He has terrain, endless forests, frozen lakes, and a defensive line his engineers have been strengthening for years. He has winter, the brutal Finnish cold that can kill as efficiently as any bullet. He has sisu, that untranslatable Finnish concept meaning something like determination, grit, and stubborn refusal to surrender even when all logic says you should. Most of all, he has soldiers who are fighting for their homes. The Farmer's Son. 400 kilometers northeast of Helsinki, in a village so small it barely appears on maps, a 23-year-old man named Lauri Törni kisses his mother goodbye. The telegram summoning him to his unit arrived yesterday, the day before the bombs fell. Törni is a corporal in the Finnish reserves, a farmer's son with calloused hands and the kind of wiry strength that comes from years of physical labor. He has never been to Helsinki. His world consists of pine forests, potato fields, and the small Lutheran church where his family has worshipped for 4 generations. He owns 1 good suit, 3 work shirts, and a hunting rifle his grandfather carried. Now he puts on the standard-issue uniform of the Finnish army, simple, practical, with no pretense of martial glory, and prepares to become part of a legend. Törni doesn't know that he will survive this war. He doesn't know that he will become one of Finland's most decorated soldiers, a specialist in unconventional warfare and guerrilla tactics. He certainly doesn't know that his life will take such strange turns that he will eventually fight in 3 different armies under 3 different flags, earning medals from both sides of World War II, one of history's most unusual warriors. Right now, he knows only that his country needs him and that the Russians are coming. The Soviet believer. On the other side of the border, in a staging area near Leningrad, a young Soviet lieutenant named Dmitry Vasiliev writes a letter to his wife. He is 26 years old, a committed communist who genuinely believes in the cause. He has been told that the Finnish working class is oppressed by bourgeois landowners and fascist sympathizers, that the Soviet army comes as liberators, that the Finnish workers will welcome them with open arms. Vasiliev believes this. He has no reason not to. He grew up during the darkest years of Stalin's purges, learned quickly that questioning official truths is dangerous, and has been shaped by relentless propaganda into a true believer. He writes to his wife that he expects to be home by Christmas, just 3 weeks away. He tells her about the warm clothes they've been issued, the good rations, the spirit of camaraderie among the men. He doesn't mention the rumors filtering through the ranks, stories of officers executed for hesitating during orders, whispers about the recent purges that have gutted the Red Army's experienced leadership. Just 2 years ago, in 1937-1938, Stalin systematically eliminated thousands of senior officers, including 3 of 5 marshals, 13 of 15 army commanders, and 110 of 195 division commanders. The men leading this invasion are often politically reliable rather than militarily competent, promoted because they survived the purges, not because they're brilliant strategists. Vasiliev writes about the tanks. He's genuinely excited about the tanks. He's seen them rolling toward the border, an endless parade of steel might. How can the Finns possibly stand against such power? He will learn the answer to that question in the frozen hell of the forest battles to come. The dictator. In the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin studies maps with the cold calculation that has made him one of history's most ruthless leaders. To him, this invasion is simple arithmetic and strategic necessity. The border with Finland lies dangerously close to Leningrad, just 32 kilometers from Finland to the Soviet Union's second-largest city. Stalin has demanded that Finland cede territory to create a buffer zone and lease the Hanko Peninsula for a Soviet naval base. The Finns refused. In Stalin's worldview, small nations don't refuse great powers. Finland's defiance is not just inconvenient, it's insulting. It's also dangerous. War with Germany seems increasingly inevitable, and Stalin cannot afford to have Finland potentially serving as a corridor for German attack on Leningrad. But there's also an element of opportunity. The Soviet Union has just carved up Poland with Nazi Germany under the secret protocols. of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact signed in August 1939. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have already been bullied into accepting Soviet bases on their territory. They will be fully annexed within months. Finland is simply the next piece in Stalin's puzzle of creating a Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. The Soviet leader has been assured by his military planners that this will be quick. Marshal Kliment Voroshilov, the People's Commissar for Defense, has promised that Finland will fall in 2 weeks. They outnumber the Finns in every category that matters. They have the industrial might of the Soviet Union behind them. They have ideological certainty. What they don't have is respect for their enemy. That will cost them dearly. 6 months earlier, May 1939. The path to war begins not with bombs, but with bureaucracy, with diplomatic notes, territorial demands, and the language of strategic necessity. Soviet diplomats approach their Finnish counterparts with what they present as reasonable requests. The USSR wants to lease the Hanko Peninsula for 30 years to establish a naval base. They want Finland to cede several islands in the Gulf of Finland. They want the border moved back from Leningrad, offering to trade a larger area of barren Soviet territory in Karelia in exchange for the more strategically valuable Finnish land near the city. To Stalin, these are modest demands from a superpower to a minor neighbor. To the Finns, they're existential threats to their independence. Finland gained independence only 22 years earlier, in 1917, during the chaos of the Russian Revolution. That independence came at tremendous cost. A civil war that killed roughly 37,000 people in a nation of only 3 million. The Reds, backed by Soviet Russia, fought the Whites, led by Mannerheim. The Whites won, but the trauma remained. Finland built its identity around never again falling under Russian domination. The diplomatic negotiations continue through the summer and fall of 1939. The Finns try to find compromise. They offer some concessions. Perhaps a smaller area could be leased, perhaps some minor border adjustments. But the core Soviet demands strike at Finnish sovereignty, and the government in Helsinki, led by Prime Minister Simo Häyhä, cannot accept them without essentially becoming a Soviet satellite. Dr. Sarah Lindström, professor of Nordic history at Uppsala University, explains the Finnish calculation. They understood they were taking an enormous risk by refusing Stalin, but they'd seen what happened to countries that gave in to reasonable Soviet demands. The Baltic states had already accepted Soviet bases, and the writing was on the wall for their independence. The Finns decided that if they were going to lose their freedom, it would be fighting, not through diplomatic surrender. The manufactured crisis. On November 26, 1939, a strange incident occurs in the village of Mainila on the Soviet side of the border. Soviet artillery positions are shelled, killing 4 Red Army soldiers, or so the Soviet government claims. The Soviets immediately blame Finland. Foreign Minister Molotov issues a furious denunciation, calling it an act of aggression by the Finnish militarists. He demands that Finland withdraw its forces 25 kilometers from the border. There's only one problem. The incident almost certainly never happened, or if it did, it was a Soviet false flag operation. Finnish forces had no artillery in range of Mainila. Independent observers find the Soviet claims dubious at best. The Finns offered to conduct a joint investigation. The Soviets refuse. Instead, on November 28th, they unilaterally annul the Soviet-Finnish non-aggression pact signed just 4 years earlier. On November 29th, they sever diplomatic relations. The next morning, the bombs fall on Helsinki. November 30th, 1939, the first day. The bombing of Helsinki is intended to break Finnish morale immediately, to show the population the futility of resistance. Instead, it galvanizes the nation. The attack kills 91 civilians and wounds hundreds more. Among the dead is a family of 4, parents and 2 children, killed when a bomb destroys their apartment building. A young woman named Aino Aalto, a schoolteacher, is pulled from the rubble of her school with both legs crushed. She will survive, but never walk again. Her last words before losing consciousness are, reportedly, "Make them pay for this. Finland will make them pay in blood and frozen corpses." As bombers strike Helsinki, Viborg, and other cities, the massive Soviet ground invasion begins along the entire 1,600-kilometer border. The main assault focuses on the Karelian Isthmus, the narrow strip of land between the Gulf of Finland and Lake Ladoga. This is where Mannerheim has prepared his strongest defenses. The Mannerheim Line, a system of bunkers, trenches, anti-tank obstacles, and fortified positions. But the line is not what Soviet intelligence believes it to be. Propaganda and poor reconnaissance have convinced Soviet commanders that they face a Finnish Maginot Line, a sophisticated network of concrete fortifications comparable to France's famous defensive system. In reality, the Mannerheim Line consists of only about 100 concrete bunkers, supplemented by wooden obstacles, mines, and whatever field fortifications the Finns could construct with limited resources. What the line has in abundance is not concrete, but soldiers who know how to use the terrain. The forest ghosts. In the forests north of Lake Ladoga, Lieutenant Dmitry Vasilyev leads his platoon down a narrow road cut through seemingly endless pine forest. The trees press in on both sides, tall and dark, their branches heavy with snow. The temperature has dropped to -20 degrees Celsius, and despite his winter gear, Vasilyev can feel the cold working its way into his bones. His column consists of about 200 men, part of the Soviet 163rd Division, pushing toward the town of Suomussalmi. They march in a long, vulnerable line along the single road. There's no other choice. The forest is too thick for vehicles to maneuver off the path. The Soviets have been told that Finnish resistance in this sector will be light, that speed is more important than caution. They are wrong. The first shot cracks across the winter silence like a breaking bone. A Soviet soldier at the front of the column spins and falls. Then the forest explodes with gunfire. Finnish ski troops, dressed in white winter camouflage, materialize from positions so close that some are within 50 meters of the road. They fire in precise, disciplined volleys, not the panicked spray of frightened defenders, but the controlled shooting of hunters who've spent their lives in these woods. Every shot counts when you have limited ammunition. Vasilyev screams orders, trying to organize a response, but his men are in chaos. They can't see the enemy. They fire wildly into the trees, bullets thudding uselessly into pine trunks. The Finns, invisible in their white suits against the snow, mobile on their skis, hit and vanish, hit and vanish. This is Moti tactics, a uniquely Finnish form of warfare. The word comes from motikeko, meaning a stack of firewood. The Finns allow Soviet columns to advance deep into the forest, then cut them into isolated segments, surrounding each moti and destroying them piecemeal. Small mobile Finnish units use the forest and winter as weapons, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before the Soviets can respond. Vasilyev's platoon takes 30% casualties in the first 15 minutes. They haven't seen a single Finnish soldier clearly. This pattern repeats across the northern front. Soviet divisions, confident in their numerical superiority and mechanized might, push into Finnish territory only to find that their advantages mean nothing in the deep forest. Their tanks can't leave the roads, their artillery can't target enemies they can't see, their supply lines stretch thin and vulnerable, and the cold, the merciless, bone-deep cold, becomes an enemy as deadly as Finnish bullets. If you appreciate stories like this, accounts of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances with courage and determination, I invite you to join us here at Not Nostalgic History. We're building a community of history enthusiasts who believe that the past isn't just dates and events, but human drama, sacrifice, and lessons that still resonate today. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Now, let's return to that frozen battlefield where the fate of a nation hangs in balance. The Mannerheim Line, December 1939. On the Karelian Isthmus, the war takes a different character. Here, the Soviets can use their massive artillery and tank forces. Here, the terrain is more open, the roads more numerous. Here, the Finnish defenders face the full weight of Soviet military might. The 7th Soviet Army, commanded by Vsevolod Yakovlev, smashes into Finnish positions with overwhelming force. On some sectors, the Soviets achieve local densities of 200 guns per kilometer of front, an artillery concentration that should pulverize any defensive position. The barrage is apocalyptic. Finnish soldier Vilho Koskela, a 19-year-old from Turku, crouches in a bunker as the world outside transforms into hell. The sound is beyond description, not individual explosions, but a continuous, crushing roar that makes thought impossible. The earth shakes. Timber supports crack and groan. Dust and smoke fill the bunker until men can barely see each other. Some men pray, some weep. Some simply press themselves against the walls and wait to die. But the bunkers hold. Finnish engineers, working with minimal resources, have built them into the landscape brilliantly. They're positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire, sited to take advantage of every natural obstacle. When the Soviet infantry advances behind their artillery barrage, they walk into a killing ground. Finnish machine gunners emerge from positions the Soviets thought destroyed. The Maxim guns, reliable, simple, deadly, open fire. Soviet soldiers fall in rows. They come again. They fall again. The snow turns red. This is industrial warfare at its most brutal. Not the mobile tank battles that will characterize later World War II combat, but the grinding attrition of World War I, repeated in the frozen north, and the Finns, outnumbered and outgunned, hold their positions through discipline, tactical skill, and sheer determination. Corporal Lauri Turney, the farmer's son, distinguishes himself in these early battles. He leads a small squad in a night raid against a Soviet command post, navigating through minefields and barbed wire with the casual skill of a man who knows forests like his own backyard. His squad kills or captures 23 Soviet soldiers and returns with valuable intelligence documents. Turney is promoted to sergeant and marked as a soldier with unusual initiative and courage. The Ratte Road disaster. In late December, the war's signature battle begins to unfold near Suomussalmi. The Soviet 44th Rifle Division, a unit from Ukraine, advances to reinforce Soviet forces already engaged in the area. They march in a long, mechanized column. Approximately 14,000 men with hundreds of vehicles, including tanks, artillery tractors, and supply trucks. They advance along a single road through the wilderness, a road that will become their grave. The Finnish 9th Division, under Colonel Hjalmar Silasvuo, has about 6,500 men, less than half the Soviet strength. But Silasvuo understands the terrain and the weather. He waits until the Soviet column is fully committed to the forest road, stretched out over 15 kilometers, unable to maneuver. Then he strikes. Finnish troops cut the Soviet column into 9 isolated segments. Each motti is surrounded and systematically destroyed. The Soviets have overwhelming firepower, but they can't use it effectively. Their tanks are trapped on the road. Their artillery can't target enemies hidden in the dense forest. Their supply trucks become obstacles when the lead and rear of each segment is destroyed, turning the column into a static, vulnerable target. The battle rages through the depths of winter. Temperatures plunge to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Soviet soldiers, many from Ukraine and other warmer climates, are completely unprepared for such cold. They freeze to death in their positions. Frostbite claims as many casualties as Finnish bullets. Men who venture away from fires to relieve themselves freeze to death before they can return. Dr. Mikhail Volkov, a Russian military historian, describes the horror. The Rate Road became a frozen museum of military catastrophe. Soviet soldiers died in their sleep as temperatures dropped. Others were killed by Finnish snipers who moved through the forest like ghosts. The wounded froze to death waiting for medical care that couldn't reach them. It was less a battle than a slow-motion annihilation. The Finns pressed their attack relentlessly. Small groups on skis infiltrate Soviet positions at night, throwing explosive charges into bunched vehicles and disappearing before the disoriented defenders can respond. Finnish snipers, including several women who volunteered for the service, pick off officers and anyone who shows leadership initiative. On January 5, 1940, the last Soviet resistance at Rate Road collapses. The Finns capture or destroy 105 tanks, 270 vehicles, 71 artillery pieces, and vast quantities of small arms and supplies. Of the 14,000 Soviet soldiers who entered the forest, only about 1,000 escape. The rest are dead, captured, or missing. One Finnish soldier walks the road after the battle, trying to process what he sees. Bodies everywhere, frozen solid in grotesque positions. A Soviet soldier sitting against a tree, looking almost peaceful, dead from cold rather than bullets. A burned-out tank with a crew that tried to survive by staying in their vehicle, only to suffocate when Finnish soldiers blocked the exhaust. Hundreds of supply trucks, their contents, food, ammunition, medicine, warm clothing, now Finnish property. The Battle of Suomussalmi is a catastrophic defeat for the Soviet Union, one of the most lopsided victories in modern military history. News of the battle spreads around the world, transforming international perception of the war. Finland is no longer a doomed victim awaiting inevitable conquest. They're David facing Goliath, and David is winning. Global reactions. International opinion overwhelmingly supports Finland. The Soviet invasion is seen as naked aggression against a peaceful, democratic neighbor. On December 14, 1939, the League of Nations, in one of its last meaningful acts before sliding into irrelevance, expels the Soviet Union for its attack on Finland. It's the only time the League ever expels a member nation. But sympathy doesn't translate into meaningful military aid. Britain and France, already at war with Germany following Hitler's invasion of Poland, consider sending troops to Finland. Not primarily to save the Finns, but to cut off Germany's access to Swedish iron ore that passes through northern Norway, with Finland as a convenient excuse. The plan is militarily questionable and politically complicated, requiring passage through neutral Norway and Sweden, both of whom refuse permission. The United States offers moral support and some material aid, but remains officially neutral. President Franklin D. Roosevelt privately sympathizes with Finland but is bound by American isolationist sentiment and neutrality laws. Sweden, Finland's closest cultural and historical partner, provides significant covert assistance. Swedish volunteers, eventually numbering about 8,000 arms, cross the border to fight alongside the Finns. Swedish weapons, ammunition, and supplies flow to Finland, though officially Sweden maintains neutrality. The most concrete assistance comes from an unexpected source. Hungarian volunteers, German weapons, sold before Hitler ordered German support to stop to avoid angering his Soviet ally, and a motley collection of international fighters drawn by the romance of Finland's cause. But volunteers and sympathy cannot overcome the arithmetic of the Soviet advantage. As December turns to January, that advantage begins to tell. January 1940. The grinding war. The Soviet Union, stung by its early defeats and international humiliation, reorganizes its forces. Stalin replaces incompetent commanders with more capable officers. Marshal Semyon Timoshenko takes overall command, bringing professional military judgment to replace political posturing. the Soviets concentrate overwhelming force on the Karelian Isthmus. If the Finns won't be beaten in the forests, they'll be crushed on the Mannerheim line through sheer weight of metal and explosives. Beginning in early February, the Soviets unleashed the largest artillery bombardage seen in Europe since World War I. On some days, 300,000 shells fall on Finnish positions. The bombardment is methodical, systematic, designed to pulverize Finnish defenses section by section. Behind the artillery comes massed infantry and armor. Soviet tactics improve as they learn from earlier failures. They stop advancing in vulnerable columns and start coordinating combined arms assaults. They use flame tanks to clear bunkers. They bring up heavy artillery to directly target Finnish fortifications at point-blank range. The Finns fight with desperate courage, but they're running out of everything: ammunition, medical supplies, food, and most critically, men. Every casualty is irreplaceable. The Soviet Union can absorb losses that would destroy any other nation. Finland cannot. Corporal, now Lieutenant, Turney fights in the Mannerheim line battles with the same aggressive spirit he showed in the forests. During one Soviet breakthrough, he personally leads a counterattack that recaptures a key bunker complex, reportedly killing 7 Soviet soldiers in close-quarters combat. He's wounded twice. A shell fragment in the shoulder, a bullet graze across the ribs, but refuses evacuation. Finnish soldiers develop a grim humor born of exhaustion and trauma. They joke that Soviet tanks have so many holes from Finnish anti-tank weapons that they'd leak if filled with water. They nickname a particularly stubborn Soviet commander the Mailman because he delivers every day. They sing bawdy songs about Molotov and Stalin that would earn them a firing squad if the Russians ever caught them. But humor can't stop artillery shells or fill empty ammunition pouches. The river Kola. Kola holds. While the Mannerheim line slowly crumbles under overwhelming pressure, one sector becomes a symbol of Finnish resistance: the Kola River. For 4 months, from December to March, Finnish forces under Major General Paavo Talvela hold a 16-kilometer front against repeated Soviet assaults. The Soviets attack with overwhelming numerical superiority, sometimes with 10-to-1 advantages. They take horrific casualties. They keep coming. The Finns, exhausted and depleted, keep holding. A Finnish machine gunner named Simo Häyhä, operating near Kola, becomes the war's most successful sniper. Using nothing but iron sights on a standard-issue rifle, dressed in white camouflage, Häyhä kills between 500 and 542 Soviet soldiers in less than 100 days, an average of 5 kills per day. The Soviets call him the White Death and organize special units to hunt him. Artillery barrages are called specifically on areas where he's suspected of operating. On March 6, 1940, an explosive bullet strikes Häyhä in the jaw, nearly killing him. He's evacuated unconscious and will spend months recovering, his face permanently disfigured. He awakens the day the war ends. But Kola holds becomes a national rallying cry, repeated in newspapers and radio broadcasts. When reporters ask officers if Kola can hold, they receive the laconic response that becomes legendary: Kola holds unless we get orders to run. Kola never receives those orders. Stories from the Frozen Front war is statistics, casualty counts, ammunition expenditures, territory lost and gained. But war is also individual stories of suffering, courage, and random fate. Anna Mäkinen, a 34-year-old nurse from Lahti, volunteers for frontline medical service. She serves in a field hospital near the Mannerheim line, working 18-hour shifts in a converted school building that shakes with each Soviet artillery barrage. She amputates frozen limbs, extracts shell fragments from traumatic wounds, holds the hands of dying boys who cry for their mothers. In a letter to her sister dated February 14, 1940, preserved in Finland's National Archives, she writes, "I have stopped counting how many have died in my arms. I used to weep for each one. Now I simply close their eyes and move to the next bed. God forgive me, I've become numb to death. But if I allowed myself to feel each loss, I would go mad, and then who would care for the ones who might still live? Anna Mäkinen survives the war. She never marries, never speaks publicly about her experiences, and dies in 1981. At her funeral, 7 elderly men, soldiers she treated, attend to pay their respects. The Soviet side, Lieutenant Dmitry Vasilyev, survives the forest battles that kill most of his platoon. He's rotated to the Karelian Isthmus for the final assaults on the Mannerheim line. In his last letter home, dated February 28, 1940, he writes words that would have earned him arrest if censors had caught them. We were told this would be easy, that the Finnish workers wanted liberation. Instead, they fight like demons. We attack, and they never break. I have lost faith in what we were told, but I cannot say this aloud. I can only hope to survive and come home to you. Vasilyev dies on March 2, 1940, killed by a Finnish artillery shell during an assault on a bunker complex near Viborg. He's 26 years old. His wife receives notification 6 weeks later. She never remarries. The Molotov breadbasket, Finnish soldiers develop a dark creativity in the face of technological disadvantage. When Soviet Foreign Minister Molotov claims that Soviet planes are dropping bread, not bombs, on Finnish cities, the Finns begin calling Soviet cluster bombs Molotov breadbaskets. Their response to Soviet tanks becomes the Molotov cocktail, a bottle filled with gasoline, tar, and potassium chlorate with a rag fuse. It's a crude weapon, terrifying to use because you must get close enough to a tank to throw it effectively, but in Finnish hands, it proves devastatingly effective. A Finnish soldier describes the experience. You wait in your hole as the tank approaches. The noise is incredible. The engine, the squealing tracks, the machine gun firing. Your whole body wants to run, but you wait. When it's close, maybe 5 meters. You light the rag and stand up. You have maybe 1 second to throw before the tank gunner sees you. The bottle arcs through the air. If you're lucky and your throw is good, it smashes on the engine deck. The fuel ignites. The tank starts burning. Then you run like hell before the ammunition inside starts cooking off. Finnish troops destroy hundreds of Soviet tanks with these improvised weapons. The image of a lone Finnish soldier armed with nothing but a bottle of flaming gasoline facing down a Soviet armored monster becomes iconic. David's sling against Goliath's armor. February-March 1940. The final push. By late February, the strategic situation has become clear. Finland is winning battles but losing the war. Soviet artillery has reduced large sections of the Mannerheim line to rubble. Finnish ammunition stocks are critically low. Some artillery pieces are limited to 10 shells per day. Casualties have been proportionally devastating. Of Finland's mobilized force of 300,000 Turks, approximately 26,000 are dead and 43,000 wounded. That's nearly 25% casualties, a rate that would break most armies. More Soviet reinforcements arrive daily. The USSR has committed over 1 million men to the Finnish front, with more available if needed. Finland has no reserves left. Every man who can carry a rifle is already in the line. Marshal Mannerheim, the aristocratic cavalry officer who has led Finland's defense with skill and determination, faces the hardest decision of his long military career. He can continue fighting, the Finnish spirit certainly remains unbroken, but the mathematics are inexorable. Continued resistance will mean the complete destruction of Finland's military capacity and possibly the occupation of the entire country. Or he can negotiate from a position of relative strength, while Finland still has an organized military force capable of making continued Soviet advances costly. On February 29, 1940, Finland signals its willingness to negotiate. Stalin, despite having the military advantage, is also ready to talk. The war has been far more costly than anticipated. Soviet casualties are estimated at 127,000 dead and 265,000 wounded, though Soviet records are notoriously unreliable, and the real numbers might be higher. The Red Army's international reputation has been badly damaged, and Stalin is increasingly worried about potential Anglo-French intervention, which, however unlikely, could complicate his strategic position as war with Germany looms. The Moscow Peace Treaty, March 12, 1940. The Finnish delegation arrives in Moscow for negotiations. They are led by Prime Minister Risto Ryti, a banker-turned-statesman who understands that he's about to sign away portions of his country under duress. The Soviet terms are harsh, harsher than what they demanded before the war. Finland must cede the entire Karelian Isthmus, including Finland's second-largest city, Viborg. Finland must surrender territory in Ladoga Karelia in the northern regions. Finland must lease the Hanko Peninsula for a Soviet naval base. In total, Finland loses approximately 11% of its territory and 30% of its economic assets. But Finland retains its independence. It remains a sovereign nation, not a Soviet puppet. Its government survives intact. Its military, though battered, remains organized and undefeated in spirit. On March 13, 1940 at 11:00 a.m., the guns fall silent. The Winter War is over. The price of survival. The human cost of 105 days of war is staggering for a small nation. Finland suffers approximately 26,000 killed and 43,000 wounded in a population of 3.7 million. This means that roughly 1 in 54 Finns is killed or wounded. The equivalent toll on the United States today would be over 6 million casualties, unimaginable in modern context. But the Finnish losses pale compared to Soviet casualties. While exact numbers remain disputed due to poor Soviet record-keeping and deliberate obfuscation, historians estimate Soviet deaths at between 127,000 and 167,000 odds, with wounded numbering between 265,000 and 300,000. Some estimates go higher. The Soviet Union loses more men conquering 11% of Finland than the United States will lose in the entire Vietnam War. Professor Richard Chambers of the London School of Economics notes, "The Winter War represents one of the most dramatic examples in modern history of tactical victory combined with strategic defeat. Finland won nearly every battle, inflicted casualties at ratios sometimes exceeding 10-1, and demonstrated remarkable military competence. Yet they lost territory and were forced to accept humiliating terms. It's a reminder that in war, winning battles doesn't always mean winning the war." The evacuation of Karelia. Perhaps the war's most poignant aftermath is the evacuation of Finnish Karelia. The territory Finland must cede to the Soviet Union is not empty land. It's home to approximately 430,000 Finnish civilians, about 12% of the nation's entire population. Under the terms of the Moscow Peace Treaty, these people must leave. Finland refuses to allow its citizens to become Soviet subjects. In one of history's largest and most organized evacuations, the entire population of Finnish Karelia packs what they can carry and moves west. An old woman named Helmi Virtanen, 67 years old, leaves the farm her family has owned for 6 generations. She packs photographs, her mother's Bible, and a quilt sewn by her grandmother. She leaves behind a house, barn, fields, a family cemetery. She walks to the nearest train station carrying a single suitcase, joins a line of refugees that stretches for kilometers, and boards a train to an uncertain future. The Finnish government will resettle these displaced Karelians throughout Finland, finding them new land and helping them rebuild. But for the evacuees, the loss is profound and permanent. An entire culture, with its own dialect, traditions, and identity, is uprooted. Even today, descendants of these evacuees form the Karelian League, an organization dedicated to preserving the memory of their lost homeland. The cry, Karjala takaisin, Karelia back, becomes a rallying cry for Finnish nationalism, though one that fades as pragmatic acceptance of geopolitical reality sets in. The Soviet lessons ignored. The Red Army's poor performance in Finland sends shockwaves through military circles worldwide, particularly in Berlin. Adolf Hitler and his generals, watching the Soviet Union struggle against tiny Finland, conclude that the Red Army is a paper tiger, weakened by Stalin's purges and ideological indoctrination at the expense of military competence. This perception directly influences Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union in 1941. He believes Germany can destroy the Soviet military in a quick campaign, much as Germany crushed Poland and France. The Winter War makes Operation Barbarossa possible by creating German overconfidence. This is tragically ironic, because the Soviet Union does learn from the Winter War. After the peace treaty, the Red Army conducts extensive analysis of its failures. It improves training, logistics, winter warfare doctrine, and combined arms coordination. When Germany invades in June 1941, the Red Army is still not fully recovered from the purges, but it's significantly more capable than the force that stumbled through Finnish forests in 1940. Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov will later write in his memoirs, "The Finnish War taught us the cost of underestimating an enemy and the importance of logistics and combined arms warfare. We paid for those lessons in blood, but we learned them. The Germans, who watched us struggle, learned the wrong lesson. They thought we were weak. They failed to see that we were learning." Finland's ongoing struggle. The Peace of March 1940 proves temporary. When Germany invades the Soviet Union in June 1941, Finland sees an opportunity to reclaim lost territory. It enters what Finns call the Continuation War, fighting alongside Germany against the USSR from 1941 to 1944. This second conflict is more conventional than the Winter War, longer, larger, and ultimately ending in another Finnish defeat and another harsh peace treaty. But Finland never becomes a German puppet, refuses to participate in the siege of Leningrad, protects its Jewish population from the Holocaust, and eventually turns against its German ally in the Lapland War of 1944-1945. Through diplomatic skill, military competence, and sheer stubbornness, Finland navigates the impossible position of being caught between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. It emerges from World War II as one of the only countries bordering the USSR to retain its democratic government and capitalist economy. The Winter War makes this survival possible by demonstrating to Stalin that conquering Finland would be far more costly than tolerating a neutral neighbor. The ghost of those frozen forests where Soviet soldiers died in heaps haunts Soviet strategic calculations throughout the Cold War. The myth and reality. The Winter War has become mythologized, transformed into a simple story of brave Finns defeating the Soviet giant through skill and courage. Like most myths, this contains truth but obscures complexity. The truth is that Finland did not win the Winter War. It lost territory, paid reparations, and was forced to accept Soviet bases near its borders. The strategic objectives Finland fought for, maintaining its territorial integrity and avoiding Soviet domination, were only partially achieved. But the myth persists because it captures something real. A small nation, given no chance by military analysts worldwide, fought an empire to a standstill and extracted terms that, while harsh, allowed it to survive as an independent state. In the context of 1939 to 1940, when small nations were being casually absorbed by larger powers, Finland's survival was itself a victory. Dr. Lindström again. We must understand the Winter War in context. Yes, Finland lost territory, but Poland ceased to exist entirely, divided between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. The Baltic states lost their independence completely within months. Czechoslovakia had been dismembered. Small nations in 1939 faced an existential crisis. By that standard, Finland's outcome, survival as a sovereign democratic state, was remarkably successful. The cult of Sisu. The war crystallizes the Finnish concept of Sisu into national identity. The word has no perfect English translation. It combines grit, determination, perseverance, and the refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. After the Winter War, Sisu becomes Finland's defining characteristic in international perception. This has both positive and negative effects. On the positive side, it gives Finns a unifying national narrative of resilience and toughness. It helps heal the divisions of the Civil War by providing a shared experience of defending the nation. It establishes Finland's international reputation as a people who cannot be easily intimidated. On the negative side, it creates pressure on individuals to conform to an ideal of stoic toughness that doesn't allow for vulnerability or emotional expression. The generation of men who fought the Winter War often struggle with what would now be recognized as PTSD, but in a culture of Sisu, seeking help for psychological wounds is seen as weakness. This contributes to Finland having one of the highest suicide rates in Europe for much of the late 20th century. Only in recent decades has Finnish culture begun to balance pride in Sisu with recognition that resilience doesn't mean suffering in silence. Military lessons. The Winter War provides military lessons that remain relevant. 1. Morale matters. The Finns, fighting for their homes against an invader, displayed commitment that overcame material disadvantages. The Soviets, told they were liberating oppressed workers, discovered that motivation based on lies crumbles under hardship. 2. Quality can compensate for quantity, but only to a point. Finnish soldiers were better trained, better led, and better adapted to the terrain and weather. This allowed them to achieve stunning tactical successes, but ultimately, Soviet numerical superiority wore them down. 3. Logistics wins wars. Soviet supply chains, stretched through difficult terrain in harsh weather, broke down repeatedly. Tanks without fuel are just expensive obstacles. Soldiers without food and proper clothing freeze to death. 4. Know your enemy and your terrain. The Finns used their knowledge of the forest and winter to create tactical advantages. The Soviets, ignorant of both, paid heavily for their arrogance. 5. Never underestimate an opponent. Soviet assumptions about Finnish weakness led to catastrophic planning and execution in the war's early phases. These lessons influenced military thinking throughout World War II and beyond. The Winter War is still studied in military academies as a classic example of defensive warfare and guerrilla tactics. The individual stories. What became of them? Marshal Mannerheim serves as Finland's military leader through the Continuation War, then briefly as President of Finland from 1944-1946, navigating the difficult transition to peace and managing Finland's relationship with the Soviet Union. He resigns due to ill health and dies in 1951 in Switzerland, honored as Finland's greatest military leader and one of the 20th century's most skilled defensive commanders. Lieutenant Lauri Turney, the farmer's son who became a decorated soldier, has one of the war's strangest aftermaths. He fights in the Continuation War with distinction, then joins the German SS to continue fighting the Soviets when Finland makes peace. After Germany's defeat, he's imprisoned as a war criminal but eventually escapes to the United States. He joins the U.S. Army under the name Larry Thorne, serves in the Special Forces, and dies in a helicopter crash in Vietnam in 1965. He's the only soldier to have served in the armies of Finland, Nazi Germany, and the United States. A complicated legacy that defies simple categorization. Simo Häyhä, the White Death, survives his wounds and lives quietly in rural Finland until his death in 2002 at age 96. He rarely speaks about the war, and when asked about his kills, reportedly says only, "I did what I was told to do. as well as I could. He's buried with military honors, the most successful sniper in military history. Anna Mäkinen, the nurse, never speaks publicly about her service, but is posthumously honored when her wartime letters are published. They provide intimate, heartbreaking testimony to the human cost of war. Lieutenant Dmitry Vasilyev is one of approximately 167,000 Soviet soldiers who die in Finland. His name appears on a memorial in St. Petersburg, formerly Leningrad, one of thousands. His widow never learns the full circumstances of his death, only that he died serving the motherland. What it means. The winter sun sets early in Helsinki in December, casting long shadows across the city's streets. On those same streets where bombs fell in November 1939, life continues. People hurry to Christmas shopping, trams run on schedule, the comfortable routines of peace prevail, but if you know where to look, you can still find scars. Buildings with mismatched brickwork where bomb damage was repaired. Memorials in small parks listing names of the dead. Museums displaying frozen artifacts, rifles, uniforms, photographs of young men who never grew old. And in every Finnish family of a certain age, stories passed down of grandparents or great-grandparents who served, who survived, who died. The Winter War matters not just as history, but as parable. It teaches us several profound truths about human nature and the nature of conflict. First, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear. Those Finnish soldiers in their forest positions, watching Soviet tanks approach, were terrified. They fought anyway because what they were defending mattered more than their fear. Second, that numbers are not destiny. The Soviet Union had every material advantage, yet they could not break Finnish resistance through sheer mass. Determination, skill, and fighting for a just cause can overcome odds that mathematics says are impossible. Third, that victories take many forms. Finland lost the Winter War by conventional measures. They surrendered territory and accepted harsh terms. But they won something more important. They survived as a free nation. Sometimes survival is victory enough. Fourth, that the cost of freedom is often paid in blood by ordinary people. Not politicians or generals, but farmers like Lauri Törni, nurses like Anna Mäkinen, and soldiers like the thousands whose names appear only on memorial stones. Democracy and independence are not natural states. They're maintained by the sacrifice of those willing to defend them. Finally, that history is written in individual stories. We can discuss casualty statistics and territorial changes, but the Winter War is really about Helmi Virtanen leaving her family farm, about Dmitry Vasilyev dying in the snow far from home, about Simo Häyhä lying in the cold for hours, waiting for a single shot, about every individual decision to stand or flee, to endure or surrender. The eternal winter. In a broader sense, the Winter War represents a moment when the arc of history could have bent differently. If Finland had surrendered without fighting, if they'd accepted Soviet demands in 1939, they likely would have suffered the same fate as the Baltic states, absorbed into the USSR, their independence lost for 50 years. The choice to fight, a choice that seemed suicidal to outside observers, made all the difference. It established that some things are worth fighting for, even when victory seems impossible. It proved that tyranny can be resisted, that small nations have agency, that the strong do not always prevail simply because they are strong. These are not comfortable lessons. They come wrapped in frozen corpses and ruined cities, in trauma that echoes through generations, in land lost and families shattered. The Winter War was not glorious. War never is. It was brutal, tragic, and painful. But it was also necessary, and it was successful in the ways that mattered most. The Finns in their snowy forests, outnumbered and outgunned, chose to stand. They paid a terrible price for that choice, but they remained free. And sometimes, freedom is worth any price. An epilogue in snow. If you visit Finland today, you can travel to the old Mannerheim line. Some of the bunkers remain, concrete remnants slowly being reclaimed by forest. You can walk the Rati Road, now paved and peaceful, and try to imagine it as a frozen corridor of death. You can stand at the Kola River and hear only wind through pine trees, not machine gun fire. The physical landscape has healed. The human scars remain. Every year, Finnish veterans, now in their 90s and beyond, their numbers dwindling, gather at these sites to remember. They come in wheelchairs and with walkers, old men bearing old wounds, to honor old comrades who never grew old. They stand in silence as names are read, as wreaths are laid, as taps plays across the snow. They know what the rest of us can only imagine. What it means to stand in the cold with death approaching, to fight not for glory or conquest, but simply for the right to remain yourself, to be free. The last veterans of the Winter War are leaving us now, joining their comrades in whatever peace awaits beyond the suffering of this world. When they're gone, we'll lose the direct human connection to those 105 days that changed history. But the story remains. The lesson remains. That courage is real, that freedom matters, that ordinary people, when pushed to the edge, can accomplish extraordinary things, that sometimes, against all odds and all reason, the few can stand against the many, and sometimes, just sometimes, the few can win. The snow falls on Finland each winter, as it always has, as it always will. It blankets the forests where Soviet columns died, the fields where Finnish soldiers held impossible lines, the cities where bombs fell on sleeping families. The snow covers the scars, but doesn't erase the memory. And in that memory lies a truth that transcends borders and generations. That as long as there are people willing to stand for what they believe in, tyranny will never have the final word. The Winter War ended on March 13, 1940, but the spirit that won it, that stubborn, defiant, unbreakable Finnish sisu, lives on, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit against impossible odds. Some battles are worth fighting even when you cannot win, and some victories are measured not in territory gained, but in the refusal to surrender what makes you who you are. Finland learned this lesson in the winter of 1939 to 1940. It's a lesson the world should never forget. This has been a presentation of Not Nostalgic History, where we believe that understanding the past in all its complexity, tragedy, and triumph helps us better navigate the present. The Winter War reminds us that freedom is never free, that courage matters, and that the human spirit, when tested, can prove stronger than any weapon. May we honor the sacrifice of those who stood in the cold and snow by remembering their story and learning from their example.